People who knew serious offenders, when did you know something was off? I know one and still keep in contact with him. We all knew he had issues with anger, but we never thought he would have hurt someone. We worked together at this restaurant for a while and we got really close. If I hadn't been in a committed relationship at the time, I would have dated him. He was super cool, down to earth, and the sweetest person until something puts him on edge. He didn't get upset often, but he had things that would make him very angry. He had a tough time when he was young because of his dad. So there were a lot of bad feelings towards men who reminded him of his dad or treated him badly. That's where we bonded because I had a tough time with my mom. Luckily, I had help to deal with my feelings. Sadly, he didn't. His parents believed that God was going to cure his trauma. It got to the point where his mother left because his father would pull him out of therapy as soon as they would start making progress, and she couldn't deal with it anymore. He got hurt about 6 months after I met him. He was helping a friend move and a dresser fell. After that, he just wasn't the same. He stopped coming to work and didn't talk much. We still talked, but we weren't as close. I was moving into the city and he lived in the suburbs, so we planned to meet up. A week later, I got a call from my friend early in the morning saying that he was in jail for hiding evidence. I was surprised. After they asked him questions, he admitted what he did pretty quickly, and it involved his dad. After he was arrested, I sent him a letter to see how he was. He had a moment where he wasn't thinking right and only remembered some of what happened. Now, he's in jail for 40 years, but might be able to leave after 20. He's taking medicine and doing really well, and last I heard, he had some jobs to do while in prison and he was talking to a psychologist. Story 2. I never suspected a thing. She was the friendliest woman. I even let her babysit my cousin when I had custody of him for a little while. She was my neighbor, a couple of houses down, and everyone adored her. She grew enormous pumpkins and was always outside, so everyone interacted with her a lot. I moved away, and a few years later, I was surprised to hear everything from my family and friends who still lived in the area. The story is that she was married to a man I knew from my time living there too. One day, he was just gone, and she was all hurt. She said he was responsible. We always suspected this happened before this incident and had left her because he got involved with someone else a few towns over. We never heard from him again, but we didn't really have a reason to. She would mention every once in a while that he was still bothering her, and she was even hurt on another occasion after his disappearance. He was self-employed and didn't really have any family. No one suspected anything. 3 years later, she was dating another man. While dating this man, the police had been investigating her for taking money from the grocery store she worked at. They went to the boyfriend's cabin where they both were to arrest her. She came to the door and said, "Okay, let me put on some clothes." The police waited at the door, then heard 2 loud noises. They ran inside and saw that she had caused a fire. It took some time to get it under control, and once they did and began investigating, they found another person in the basement who had passed away several days earlier. It was later confirmed to be her boyfriend. Then they began investigating further and found her husband in the backyard. So she did all those things, and all she was suspected of was stealing from the grocery store. Okay, so here's a Netflix series in the making. Small town grocery thief, big time taker of lives. Sprinkled in between would be tense scenes of that friendly woman in her garden growing pumpkins and taking care of neighbors' kids. Story 3. Looking back, I should have known immediately, but I didn't even know what I was seeing. In 2016, I was working as a server, and one of my coworkers was always complaining about her crappy husband and how they always fought. They were from Chicago and kind of always just loud and aggressive, so I didn't think much of it. One night, they both came in for dinner and drinks and sat in my section, and I was looking forward to finally meeting her husband so I could give him a face. I just remember not being able to look him in the eye and feeling super uncomfortable anytime I needed to go over to their table, because my friend would try to spark conversation, and I wanted to talk to her, but the guy's presence just sitting there would creep me out. They left that night, but soon she stopped coming to work, and then, a couple of weeks later, news broke about the tragic incident involving them both. It was heartbreaking, and I no longer take those types of disputes lightly. I also knew about an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me, and we hung out sometimes, but not just the two of us. Still, we'd chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back, but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and kept moving. I remember thinking maybe we didn't know each other as well as I thought. Later, he was playing Nintendo with my roommate, and when I came home, he apologized and said his mind was elsewhere. A couple of days later, there were cops all over the building interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate in an abandoned lot across town. The next day, she confessed. Story 4. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had mistreated the girl before. As it turns out, controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was preparing something in the backyard soil. He said if he couldn't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. But then he somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break, and they went missing for a few days. It turned out to be the worst possible scenario. I met the girl only a few times and him only once, but the fact that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. There was also a kid I went to high school with who always gave me the creeps. We had a lot of mutual friends, so we always ended up hanging out, and it always made me feel really uncomfortable. In our senior year, he got suspended for like a week because someone had found and turned in a hit list he had made. No one really took it too seriously. About 3 years after we graduated, he was in the news for taking out a man in our town that he barely knew. Story 5. We, my partner and I, had some neighbors move in across the street, a young couple in their 30s. The guy would come over almost every day to chat with my partner. My partner told me he would say things about difficult experiences from his past and feeling neglected. His wife was weird. She just sat on the porch, not talking to anyone or doing anything, just sitting there. All I knew about her was that she didn't have custody of her kids. A few months ago, our street was filled with police cars and ambulances. Being curious, we watched out the window for hours as police officers entered the house, tended to the couple's property, and eventually observed as 2 stretchers were loaded into a vehicle right in front of our house. It turned out they'd passed away tragically. They had left a lawnmower running indoors, which emitted fumes. My partner and I felt sympathy for them because the landlord disposed of their belongings into the street the day after, and only one person came by to express condolences. We also felt some frustration at the situation, especially regarding the fate of their pet. I tried finding the obituaries but couldn't. Months after this happened, I saw a video of a man confronting someone who had made advances towards his daughter. I checked a public registry and to my surprise, the wife's mugshot came up. She had a different last name than I had thought, so I searched her name online to see if there were any obituaries. There were, along with news articles about her and her ex-husband's illegal acts. It was shocking to learn about her troubled history. We didn't feel as sympathetic towards them anymore, so yeah, that was quite an emotional roller coaster. Now that just goes to show you never ever really know who your neighbors are. Story 6. I once knew a guy who committed something troubling, becoming our town's first repeat offender. Let's call him Steve. I knew him through scouts. To preface, our scout troop was pretty laid back. We didn't tend to bother with badges, and the 2 troop leaders were pretty cool guys. Mostly, we played silly games like crab football, built catapults to fire stuff across the hall at each other, etc. You get the picture. We were a bit of a gang of misfits, but Steve was really weird. The first time it came out was when he would dance around with his bum out. At first, it was outrageous and funny, and he kept getting told to stop. When he kept doing it, it got a bit annoying. None of us were keen to see that. Then it got boring and just outright weird when it wasn't remotely funny. No one wanted him to do it, yet he continued. He also used to bring in printouts of inappropriate materials which were obviously confiscated and thrown away. He was clearly trying to gross people out for his amusement. A few times he was suspended for a week or so, but given we were quite laid back and the troop leaders were good guys, they probably couldn't bring themselves to ban him completely. It was a long time ago, so I can't recall all the details, but I remember him being quite childish in mentality, but also very creepy. When I found out that he was involved with a nurse's tragic passing, I was shocked but not surprised. Then I remembered I'd played hide and seek in the dark with this guy in a hall with a kitchen full of knives. Story 7. I didn't know him as a friend, but as a regular customer in my shop. He would come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion, he caught and helped us evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local girl went missing and was eventually found a few weeks later. They announced they were looking for somebody in connection with her passing, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying a beer in a shop. It is still unconfirmed to this day if it was our shop as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel. It was a rolling story local to us. We started to discuss the guy, if we saw him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl who had previously told management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there were too many creepy men around, told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her uncomfortable enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the crime as he was found deceased in a local park a few days later. All right, so honestly, here now, these stories are a good reminder to trust your instinct. Like when you have that doubt in your gut, just don't do it. And if someone gives you the creeps, there's probably a reason for it. Some of us may be unassuming, but still, stay sharp, people. If you're getting chills from these accounts, please do hit that like and subscribe button to hear more, and watch out for more content like this one coming up. Let's continue on with the stories. This is story 8. I just realized that I have 2 scenarios in my life that are worth sharing. Firstly, I attended the same school as the girl who gained infamy in the US for convincing her boyfriend to end his life, and then running all these charity events for him before getting caught. The text messages were public record and absolutely chilling. I think she ended up getting off with a lighter sentence, but the case is being appealed and will likely go to the Supreme Court. She was extremely forgettable in high school, nothing remarkable whatsoever. Secondly, while I was in college, I worked in the bookstore over the summers. I worked with a guy there who was a decent guy, but always a little weird. He'd make inappropriate comments about some of the students that would come in for books, etc., but seemed harmless enough. He ended up being charged with a serious crime for hurting his wife. I believe an affair was involved. The only reason that poor woman lived was because a construction worker saw the incident and intervened, so shout out to that guy for being brave. Not a serious offender, but I also had a friend in college who lived on the same street as this poor kid who chose to end it all. I'm sure it wasn't a big surprise since he had a terrible and tough life according to my buddy, and that was well known by the people in his neighborhood and town. Hold up, whoa, you went to the same school as that girl? I guess she's not that forgettable anymore, but that's not something a normal person would want to be remembered for anyway. Wow. Story 9. Honestly, I didn't. He was the son of a wealthy family. We were really good friends growing up. He would invite us all over to his awesome game room to play Warhammer, and would use his massive allowance to buy us Warhammer boxes just so he could have more people to play with. He ended up getting his own house right after high school, and we all hung out there for movie and video game nights. We gladly shared spare bedrooms, and he let us crash in when we needed a place to get away for a while. He's now serving 300 plus years for 4 counts of serious offenses. We had absolutely no idea he was capable of doing those things. It really shook me up just knowing I hung out with him so much and he bought me so much great stuff that defined my high school years. I still have the Warhammer figures in my closet. I'm tempted to throw them out sometimes just to fully remove him from my life. But at the same time, these figures brought back a ton of great memories with my other friends. When I look at them, those memories are the ones that come to mind. I see the endless summer afternoons of all of us painting figures and tearing up the tabletop together. I don't see the guy who bought me the box they came in. Story 10. My ex. We were middle school sweethearts that led into high school. He was sweet and good to me. We drifted apart, but we stayed friends. About a year later, his best friend made a comment while they were drinking about finding me attractive, which led my ex to treat him badly. He went to jail as a juvenile and got out. He came back with anger issues, and we all kind of went our separate ways. The ex moved to Florida. Next, we all heard he was in jail for a more serious offense. Like most bad Florida-related stories, he got involved in substances. He met a girl, and in their desperate attempt to keep their habit going, they targeted this elderly couple. They broke into and raided their home. They got their PIN numbers and anything else they thought had value. In their ingenious minds, they decided that this elderly couple saw too much, so they thought of a way to keep them quiet. Once they felt the job was done, they took their ATM cards and were able to get $200 from that, and that was it. That was how they were tracked, too. He is currently on condemned row for what they did and a slew of other offenses. And that, folks, is the story of my ex. Alright, so she got out at a good time, at least right before all hell broke loose in her ex's mind and life. Nonetheless, these are some pretty sad stories to hear, but also, I gotta admit, good lessons to learn from. Story 11. Someone in my high school became the cause of his grandmother's passing one day before school. I didn't really interact with him much, but we weren't in the same grade, so we didn't have many classes together or any mutual friends. But I do remember seeing him quite a few times as I was working in the library during my lunch periods that year. He was just quiet and didn't talk much. He would sometimes just be sitting there and then get frustrated at himself or whatever he was doing and kind of flip out a little. Like a little bigger than, "this math problem is really ticking me off," and a little less than full on flipping out. But it would seemingly be about nothing. He wouldn't have any pencils or paper, so I don't think he was doing homework when he would do this. Sometimes he would have a book in front of him, but again, I didn't really pay too much attention to him. But yeah, one morning the incident happened. I forget the reasoning. I think it was something like she caught him skipping school and he went crazy on her. It was extremely sad. And I went to a really good school that he had to test well to get into, so he had to be kind of book smart at the least. That was devastating though. Story 12. I sat next to him in choir class. He always seemed a bit disconnected, like he was in his own world most of the time. During a class trip, we shared a hotel room and he behaved in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. I initially thought he might be on the autism spectrum, but now I wonder if it was something more, like schizophrenia. He never displayed any violent tendencies, but then again, no one really got close enough to him to know for sure. A few months ago, he became the cause of his mother's demise. He confessed, claiming he received a disturbing message that urged him to commit the act. However, there are doubts about the authenticity of his claim as he seemed eager for attention when speaking to the police. He surrendered himself and was later cleaned off before being placed in custody. Now he faces a 40-year prison sentence. His mom was an amazing woman. She tailored our suits for choir and was constantly volunteering. If there was an event, she was there. She was going to be her town's councilwoman next year too. She loved her son very much. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Story 13. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school. He was your typical redneck kid, but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural South. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with. He was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated from the same town we all grew up in, he caused his entire family to meet a terrible end, just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride an ATV with his friend later that day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment, at least he said. It was weird seeing this kid, who was, to my knowledge, just dumber than a bag of rocks with an odd innocence in him, on trial for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time. It was almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something, perhaps sadness? Story 14. There was this guy who hurt a young, dark-haired woman. It turned into a cold case for 9 years. They finally caught the guy a couple of years ago. The crazy thing was, I, a young, dark-haired woman, worked next door to the bar where this guy drank every night. I was also a heavy drinker who frequently became tipsy and wandered home on and off nights. Almost every night. I'm almost 2 years sober now, thank God. However, I knew something was off about this guy the minute I laid eyes on him. I read people easily. I just knew he wasn't someone to know. I talked to everyone who frequented that bar, but I never had a single conversation with him. And if I was out on a smoke break while he was outside, I just never felt like I could turn my back on him. When they arrested him due to one of his relatives adding their DNA to a genetic testing site, I straight up got chills for the first time in my life. The crazy thing was, I wasn't surprised. I was just surprised I knew from the minute I saw him. The signs were there, or sometimes not. But either way, these stories make you think about who we really come across in our day-to-day lives, huh? Creepy too. Now, if you love these kinds of stories, that's cool. Just hop on over to the next one. What was life like with criminal parents? Story 2 is devastating to hear. I could totally relate. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.